Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of the Beards and Cars podcast here on HSG, and this is a very big episode because it's the 100th episode, and chances are I'll have probably put that in the title and the thumbnail, and I actually asked you guys, what would you like to see in episode 100? And there were some comedic answers, some genuine ones, some things which we've already done that we could revisit, like predictions, that kind of stuff. But before we get into what the topic of this video is, or the multiple topics even, I do want to also say, of course, that this is available, or at least it will be in a couple of hours' time, in its pure audio podcast form over on the HSG official SoundCloud page, so slap the link down below and follow that page to see it when it's released. I know that many of you guys are already listening to those. That was cool to see last week. And especially given how new that SoundCloud is, to have like a couple hundred listens already, that's pretty cool. Now, as far as what I've ultimately decided in conjunction with many of your suggestions to do with this episode is to take a brief look back over Beards and Cars for those who are maybe new to the series, but also those who have maybe joined it recently, maybe you've been an OG since day one, and to see things that have changed, how the series has done, what my future plans are, and also not just for Beards and Cars, but for the channel as a whole. Now, as a little bit of an interesting history lesson when it comes to Beards and Cars, what many of you may not realise, unless you've been around on the channel since before, like 2 years ago, is that Beards and Cars was not a successful series when it began. The first couple of episodes did pretty well, but that's not too surprising because things that debut as a new thing, at least the first episode does tend to do pretty well. The first episode of Unsung Heroes, for instance, the first episode of Beards and Cars, etc. However, the biggest mistake that I made with Beards and Cars is something that I thought was a good idea at the time, and it was all down to the thumbnails. And this is actually a good little piece of advice for many of you who are trying to create your own content, especially if your content has a kind of a serialized nature where you revisit it over and over again like an episode-based thing. And that is that I had watched other podcasts. I still like listening to stuff like Ear Biscuits with Rhett and Link, or the Outlaw podcast with John Roker from the Collider Movie Talk Network, various other podcasts that I listen to, but I tend to listen to the video version because I don't really bother with podcasts, so I just put it on YouTube instead and listen to it there. So what I noticed about these series, and even Rhett and Link still do this to some degree, is their thumbnails pretty much all look the same when it's a podcast series. Because people who go to listen to it pretty much know what they're going in for. They just read the title and then they watch the video, or they don't watch the video. And chances are, if you are a fan of a podcast series, you probably just watch all of them anyway. So I thought, well, that's what people will probably do. If they like my series, then they'll come back. But the interesting thing is, if you go back, and of course you can do this, I'm going to put a link to the entire playlist of Beards and Cars in the description below. If you go back to probably anything before episode 40 or so, maybe closer to 30, everything from there back to episode 1 has a disproportionately low amount of views in comparison to everything since then. Because I did some quick math, or not so quick math actually, going through pages and pages of Beards and Cars on my channel, looking up how well it's done, how many views they have, and also the average views across the series. Now, as an FYI, a very interesting one for me because I'd never looked this up before, Beards and Cars as an entire 100 episode series has brought in over 540,000 views, which doesn't actually sound that high considering that it's 100 episodes. You'd probably think it was 1 million or more at this point, but that's the funny thing. And ironically, it's actually a case of me shooting myself in the foot to some degree, as I have done twice now on the channel, because again, I mean, you'd have to be really an OG to remember this point, but way back in 2014, when I was doing the potato camera, Gran Turismo 6 top speed tunes and nothing else, no reviews, none of that, back then, I was shooting myself in the foot without even realising it, and that is, I was uploading these videos straight from my iPhone to YouTube. They had very minimalist thumbnails, not much in the description, but crucially, I was putting a load of tags on those videos, but something was happening between uploading them and them actually being on YouTube where they did not have any tags at all. So unless somebody typed in, like, that specific title of the video, chances are they wouldn't find it. So they were getting pathetic views, coupled with the fact that the channel was so small as well, so I didn't get promoted as much in search results. And it destroyed the effect of what could have been a lot more growth at the time. Now, although I can't go back and change that, it was certainly a good lesson to learn to take more care when it comes to editing, setting up videos, because you can have the best content in the world, and if you don't market it correctly, it will go nowhere. And I'm by no means saying that I'm the best marketer out there, certainly not. I've always considered myself to be more of a creative type than a marketing type. Some guys just have, the gift of the gab, they're a hype man, and that's what they're good for. That's not so much my side of things. I've always preferred to rely on the quality of my content, rather than making it maybe as clickable as other people's content. So, that works to some degree, but on YouTube it kind of doesn't. Because on YouTube, unfortunately, you have to make things as flashy as possible for it to get any attention, because everything is flashy. Now, of course, you could take the opposite stance to that and make it kind of dull, and then it stands out in an unironic way, really. But that's, for instance, why I use like a lot of yellow in the thumbnails and stuff like that, because that is marketing. It's all part of it, these small details. Now, that was the second major mistake that I made, and it was about beards and cars, because if you have been around long enough to remember when Beards and Cars started, you might remember that every single episode had the same thumbnail. It was literally the same thumbnail that the first episode still has, because I decided to leave that one as it is because it's kind of a historic thing, that first episode, and it's actually a selfie of me, which is the same selfie that I use as a lot of my profile pics, like on Facebook, on the Discord server, etc., on Twitter as well. And I believe on Instagram also. It's just me, but with the HSG logo, I've modified it a bit. But that was the Beards and Cars logo. I used to use a Minecraft font. Not sure why, but there you go. It was just these big block letters. And I would use that same thumbnail every week and just change the number in the thumbnail, because that's what all the other podcasts that I watch also do. It would be the same thumbnail. Even a channel as huge as Rhett and Link still essentially do that same thing. So I thought, well, why not? Now, the thing that I didn't factor in is that when their channel is as big as theirs, it doesn't matter if not everyone watches it, because they have so many numbers, so many people, that even if only 5 to 10% of those people click on it, that's still a massive amount. Whereas for me, especially 2 years ago, when this channel was nowhere near the size that it is now, you're probably talking 10 to 15,000 views, or 10 to 15,000 subs, I should say, at that point, if that. Well, 10% of that is nothing in comparison to what it would be now. Now, if you look at episodes of Beards and Cars since episode 40 or so, maybe even a little bit earlier, you'll see that the views are actually much higher. In fact, across the whole series, even though like the first 30 or so episodes have barely over 1,000 views, some of them even have like 400 views apiece, which is insane to think of now. But if you look at them now, some of the more recent ones have 10, 15, 20, 30,000 views. And although that's not consistent every week, which I wouldn't expect it to for a 40k channel, that's just not how it works, especially when a number of people, unfortunately more and more people, have been telling me that not all of my uploads are showing up in their inbox because of YouTube's, worthless algorithm, and it's just not showing subscribers their actual subscription box for whatever reason. And it's definitely affecting more channels than others, that's for sure. And the smaller the channel, the more hard-hitting it's going to be, for the exact reason that I mentioned just now. If someone like Jimmy Broadbent or Super GT gets only 10% of his, audience engagement, that's still 10 to 20,000 views. If I only get 10% audience engagement, that's 4,000 views. That's a massive difference. So if you look at my views, that is essentially what's happening. Only about 10% of my audience seem to be being shown that, which is really annoying. And when the videos do really well, such as breaking news or leaks, that tends to be a combination of my existing audience and fresh eyes. That's why I tend to call those videos good traffic earners, because they appeal to both quadrants. Both quadrants? No, that's not how... That's not how quadrants work. Both halves, I should say, where it appeals to people who are already subscribed and to new people. So I would say that the single biggest piece of advice, or the single best piece of advice even, that I received on this whole channel actually that I can remember, and I've had lots of good advice for sure, but the one that always sticks out to me because it made such a tangible difference is that somebody, and unfortunately I can't remember who and I wasn't able to find the comment because it was at least a year ago, probably more, they commented that if I actually changed my thumbnails each week to be more related to the topic, rather than just this same thumbnail with a different number each week, they would probably do better. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try that and look at what difference it made. A massive difference. Now, if you go back to those videos now, and I'd actually love if you guys did go back, not just for the views, but because a lot of the topics that you guys actually asked me to talk about now, I have talked about in those early episodes, even stuff that we've revisited, like predictions, some of which have come true, Gran Turismo 7 talk, game talk, movie talk, various other things. And those episodes just don't have the views compared to now because, well, it was my own fault to some degree, in combination, of course, with a much smaller channel at the same time. Because let's say I did have, 10,000 subscribers at the time, if only 10% of the audience is getting shown that, that's 1,000 people. So even of those 1,000 people, not all of them are going to watch every episode, and so that's why the views get so low. Now, if you look at the episodes after, like the 30 to 40 episode mark, there's a drastic increase in views because of that advice. And it was such good advice, it made a world of difference to Beards and Cars, to the point where now we're at episode 100. Back then I used to think, I'm not sure how I'm going to continue this series because I just don't know how many topics there are. But look at us now. We talk about new stuff every week, we revisit topics, we change thoughts based on circumstance, especially when it comes to Gran Turismo, but of course a number of other things as well. And one of the things that I did as well is I retroactively went back and changed a lot of those thumbnails, everything except the very first one, in fact, to see if that would improve it as well. And some of them it has. There's one episode in particular that really stands out because I changed the thumbnail, and it's got a picture of a yellow Ferrari Enzo with a big hate written on the thumbnail. And it's the episode titled Cars That I Hate. And of course, that's a very clickable topic. People love to analyze what other people hate and tell them why they're wrong, especially when you put a Ferrari Enzo in the thumbnail, of course. So that episode has like 10,000 views, so it really stood out back then, but most of them don't, and it's completely understandable why they didn't. So that piece of advice was fantastic. It made a world of difference. And even with the first 20, 30 or 40, however many it is, episodes that barely have 3 or 4 or 500 views each, if that, I believe the lowest one actually has 190 views. Even with all of those, the series as a whole still averages 5,500 views per episode. And for a channel that's only 42,000 subscribers, that's actually not bad, especially when 30 or 40 of those episodes are really dragging that average number down. And then you have other ones that really bring it up with the 10, 20, 30,000 views. So it's been a very interesting series. And I know that a lot of you guys really enjoy Beards and Cars, and that's awesome to see. Of course, as a creator, you hope that the people who enjoy your stuff are going to enjoy something new. And with Beards and Cars, although it follows the same format, one of the things that I do enjoy about it is that due to the nature of the style of a podcast series like it, where it's topic-based, each week can be totally different to the previous one. One week could be a rant, another could be a top 10, another could be a countdown, another could be a prediction. There can be so many different things. And there's not many series on the channel where that can happen. Most of them tend even to be a series where it's very specifically about one thing. For instance, if you click on B-Road Ballers, you know what you're going to get. Hot hatches, and that's it. If you click on high rollers, you know what you're going to get. Heavy hitters, days gone by, ultimate exotics. They're very specifically about that. When it comes to the tuning, if you click on, circuit tunes, that's what you're going to get. If you click on drag tunes, drift tunes, it's all very compartmentalized. And that's something which I always tried to do on the channel because, again, for those who maybe haven't heard me say this before, because I believe I've mentioned this ages and ages ago on the channel, my goal ultimately on YouTube has never been to be an entertainment or comedic YouTuber. even a YouTube gamer, which usually gamers do go for that. They try to be comedic, they try to do the Let's Plays and the playthroughs and all that kind of stuff. That's never really been my style, and even when I tried it, it didn't really work. I tried to play through The Thing. Now, of course, that also didn't work because that's not the audience here on the channel, but even if I played through something like Gran Turismo, it's just not my style. That isn't my commentary, and many of you have begun to enjoy my GT Sport highlight series where it follows my online campaign, and that's something which was highly experimental to begin with, and many of you love it, so we've continued that. It's like 5 episodes in now. So that as another example. I don't do live commentary. I do commentary after the fact because that has always been my style. I'm not the kind of person who talks as the race is happening because, again, it's just not the way I do things. I prefer to analyse it, to consider what could have gone better, what could have gone worse, and evaluate it after the fact. And also talk about things which are kind of, more important than just who was in second place at this particular point or who was in third place, who moved up to first. I cover that stuff, but you'll notice that each episode of that series so far has actually talked about a specific issue or topic within sport mode. Penalties, cheating drivers, physics, stuff like that. They're kind of specifically geared around that central idea rather than just, and now he's up into first place and he's into the first corner and he's coming down. Anyone can do that. Loads of channels already do. So I wanted it to be different. And with Beards and Cars, I wanted it to be the same. And it certainly is because many of you love it. And of course, as I said, being a creator on YouTube, it's awesome to know that people love a particular series that you do or some kind of content that you put out. The 2 most common ones that I tend to hear the most love for now are Beards and Cars and Unsung Heroes. Again, totally different series compared to each other, but I love the fact that people enjoy those as well. And that's actually changed because those tend to be the 2 favourites that get mentioned the most now, whereas back in the day, it was always the same one. People used to always say the same series was their favourite, Spirit of Le Mans, because that was the very first review series I ever did, and it was one of the things that helped the channel begin to grow because so many new people found the channel that way. And it was almost like that was the second phase of the channel, if you will. Because the first phase was doing those daily Gran Turismo top speed tunes on my phone. Then I believe, in January of 2015, I believe it was, we reviewed the very first car on the channel, the Jaguar XJR9 in Spirit of Le Mans, and then that was kind of the beginning of phase 2, the review phase, and that has remained constant even until now. So every so often I've kind of brought in these new big things, be it Unsung Heroes, Beards and Cars, tuning in one form or another, reviews, rally builds, and it kind of acts as like a new level for the channel. And again, as I've mentioned before, that's something that I've always tried to do, not just with this series, but with the whole channel, and really every channel that I do, and that is I try to appeal to as wide an audience as I can. Not just within Gran Turismo even, that's one of the reasons why I like to do Forza content, Project Gotham, Test Drive Unlimited, motorbike games as well. It's all within this overarching sphere of racing and driving and riding and automotive kind of stuff. But at the same time, it appeals to so many different audiences within that. And although I'm still predominantly known as, a Gran Turismo channel, I do like how many people are purely here for the Forza side of things. That's very cool to see. And those Forza videos sometimes have disproportionately large amounts of views. Some of the top 10 videos I've ever done are for Forza, even though that's not predominantly the channel that I'm known for. So that's cool to see as well. Now, of course, I'm going to go more into the kind of goals for the channel, the growth that we've had recently. I do all that kind of stuff at the end of the year, usually, or when we hit a subscriber milestone. So each year, for those who don't know, especially those who have joined in maybe the past couple of months, I like to do a thank you for the year video. I did one in, I believe, 2016, 2017, 2018. And of course, we'll do one at the end of this year, and we basically recap what has happened on the channel. Significant videos, how much the channel's increased, what the potential growth for the new year is, for instance. Now, this year has slumped a little bit, and it's actually kind of going up again now. And that's partially because there are more and more people not playing GT Sport anymore. The amount of comments that people are saying, I'm out for another month, I'm coming back when the next update's here. Those comments are becoming more and more frequent. And it's not just that they're not coming to the channel, they're not even playing the game as much. So although tons of people still are, a ton of people aren't either. So of course the views and the subscriber count is not going to remain the same. I do tend to still average somewhere in the region of 1,000 new people a month, which is still very healthy for a channel of its size, and in terms of views, it's usually 400,000 a month at least. So sometimes peaking at around 15 to 20,000 views per day across the channel. That's on a better day, sometimes 10 to 12,000 on a more average day. So overall, it's still going very well on the channel. Beards and Cars is going very well. Beards and Cars has never been one of those series that I expect to maintain a certain amount of views, because A, that's a good way to disappoint yourself if you don't get them, but also because Beards and Cars is a series that doesn't necessarily have that name in the title. So unless you click on an episode, or if you're already familiar with the channel, you probably won't actually know that it's Beards and Cars until you click on it, because it's not in the title or the thumbnail. So I never expect those to all have 10,000 views an episode or 20,000 views, because the topics vary so much that of course they're not going to be the same. Something like a Gran Turismo 7 prediction video, as I've done, of course is going to get way more views than me talking about some crazy day that I had in London, because that's more of like a vlog kind of video, and yet they're both in the same series, because that's just the nature of it. It's kind of just shooting the breeze to some degree, and that's what I enjoy about the series as well. And although, as I said, we're going to save the majority of this kind of discussion for the end of the year video when it comes to specific numbers and goals and that kind of thing, there is one thing that I did want to mention. Many of you guys still haven't watched it based on the amount of views that it has, but it is getting more and more, which is cool to see. There was probably the most significant new phase I would say we've ever done on the channel. Maybe the second most significant, given that the first video I ever did is by definition the most significant, but many of you will have seen that I recently did my first real car review. In fact, I used the footage from it in a recent Beards and Cars episode where I reviewed the BMW i8 Roadster. Now that is the most significant new phase on the channel, I would say, in quite some time, because it's always been a goal, and many of you guys ask me, what's to come on the channel? Could you talk about things that you want to do on the channel? And I would love to talk about things more, but there are two reasons why I don't. One is obviously I don't want ideas stolen by other channels who are already big enough to do them, but at the same time, I don't want to put ideas out there when I'm no way near accomplishing them, which I still have some ideas like that, because then people just think about those ideas, and the longer it takes to get to them, they can feel more disappointed. So if I just don't say it, then it's not as disappointing. It's just a nice surprise. But for those who are interested in what future developments I can talk about, especially when it comes to real-world cars, it is safe to say I'm still working on bringing that back again. It's definitely something which is going to become a bigger part of the channel. Now, currently, there are a number of factors why it's not already more of a part of the channel. Of course, I've only had my license for about 3 months, which probably close to 4 months now. So, of course, there are certain manufacturers or certain car owners who wouldn't necessarily want me driving their expensive car unless they have a waiver or their own insurance, which BMW had, for instance. But looking beyond that, I definitely want to work with more manufacturers. I already am in talks with others. We'll see how things work out. Some of them are more helpful than others, for sure. I actually had one manufacturer in particular who were very, very eager to have something like this done because they saw how beneficial it was, but at the same time, their insurance wouldn't cover it, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, of course, very understandable, and that's fair enough. And that actually leads me to another part of that as to why I'm not doing more car reviews already as a weekly thing, even though I'd love to, and that is, in order to do a lot of these, for instance, those, manufacturers who their insurance doesn't cover a test drive review, for instance, I need to have my own business insurance to cover that kind of thing. And for one thing, it's not as easy as you'd think to find that kind of business insurance. In fact, a lot of business insurance providers specifically do not cover that. They don't even cover regular test drives, let alone, automotive press, in effect, insurance. So not only is it very specialized, very niched and difficult to find, but because there are so few people doing it, and because it's so specialized, you pay a massive premium. I actually had a quote, for instance. The company in question would not insure me currently. I have to be driving for at least a year for them to even give me an actual policy. But they told me it'd be about $5,500 just to cover me test driving cars. And that's not on a racetrack. That's not doing 100 plus miles an hour. That's just road speed. That's very expensive just to drive some cars to get a couple of thousand views at the moment in each video. So, people like, Shmee, Doug DeMuro, those kind of guys who have massive amounts of funding purely from the channel, let alone what else they do in their personal life, they can afford those kind of things. But for a small channel like mine, of course, it's not as much of an option right now. Now, there are other ways around that. As I said, already worked with Beamer, drove a £130,000 car, but that's because certain companies have those insurance clauses in place for those kinds of things. So that's not an issue for those companies. And as I said, I am working towards doing more. But as far as the future of the channel, there are things which I'm always mulling over, things which I want to do. Many of you guys have noticed, as well as I have, how places like GTPlanet or the Gran Turismo the Gran Turismo YouTube page have been debuting series and doing things that are very similar to what I do here on the channel. You could even say copying stuff here on the channel. And although I believe that to some degree they probably are copying it, I don't think that GTPlanet or Gran Turismo as a whole copy me or any other creator. I believe that certain people are put in charge of that side of things, such as Gran Turismo's YouTube division, let's say, or GTPlanet's YouTube side of things. Those people, I believe, probably do watch other creators, not just me, but others too. And I believe they probably do take cues or inspiration, if you want to be very liberal about it, more likely, just straight up copying them, for want of a better word. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to two things in particular. And recently, I was banned, actually, from GTPlanet yesterday, in fact, and I was going to dedicate a whole episode of this series to it, but I thought, you know what, forget it. They're not worth that kind of airtime of a whole video, so I've just shoved it as a tack on the end of this one instead. But yeah, I was banned from GTPlanet yesterday for, according to them, trolling. Sure. What they call trolling, I call holding their moderators responsible for their actions. I mean, what a crazy concept, right? Almost as if GTPlanet moderators think that they have more authority than an actual government, considering that the public, for instance in America, according to their official constitution, has every right to overthrow government if they are doing things wrong. And yet these GTPlanet moderators believe clearly that they have more authority than the American government, because you can't question them. Yeah, well, you make your own conclusions about that, but that, according to them, is trolling. Expecting someone to actually be responsible for their actions. If that's the definition of trolling these days, then we really are screwed. Now, as far as the stuff that I'm talking about with the copying side of things, I'm not going to straight up say that they're plagiarizing me, but I'm going to say it's pretty damn close. And let's be honest, it is pretty damn close. Because although, and it's absolutely correct, GTPlanet has had, for instance, a photo mode competition for a number of years more than I have here on the channel, which is absolutely true, that was never my point. My point was that I create a channel, or I create a series even here on the channel, where it's a YouTube-based photo mode competition, very specifically, that does not have a winner. It's a showcase, not a competition. It's just called that for the sake of people recognizing what it's supposed to be. And it's a weekly thing, music in the background, splicing the images together with PSN names. It's a very specific formula that many of you enjoy. Then, GTPlanet just so happens to debut a new series on YouTube called Scapes Friday. And what did they do? They have the exact same formula, exact same layout that I do here on the channel. If you watch any of those videos, they use literally the exact same format. Pictures collaged together with the PSN names and a funky music backtrack. Now, maybe they didn't copy me. My point is, that's really damn close. And even more close than that, and this is the one which GTPlanet could not argue with me on, is, many of you of course know and love, Again, another massive new development on the channel this year, and I'd forgotten about it just now actually. This might actually be bigger than that BMW review. I debuted my biggest announcement, of course, the GT Sport Community Spotlight. And then, almost immediately after, the Gran Turismo YouTube page and the Facebook page just so happens to start the hashtag MyGTMoment series, where you can submit your GT moment of racing, and they can feature it on their page. Funny that. Very funny indeed. I'm sure that's just coincidence. Now, as I said, the only reason why I could even begin a series like that in the first place is because Gran Turismo and Polyphony and GTPlanet weren't doing their job properly. So maybe they've finally decided to pull their finger out and do their job. Considering that, and again, I told them this on GTPlanet, and of course they didn't like hearing this, and that's why I enjoy saying it, that if this 300,000 or 400,000 member community on a place like GTPlanet with their apparently crack team of writers in control, so clearly seen from this crack team of writers that they must be great writers because they have to ban people instead of proving them wrong. You must be such a great writer. Use your words. But they decided to ban me for basically saying that if the best ideas that those 300,000 or 400,000 members and this whole team and polyphony integration and all of that, if the best ideas they can come up with are the same as one guy with a YouTube channel, then you're doing something wrong. And that was my point, of course, when I released the GT Sport Community Spotlight to begin with. The whole point in that first announcement video that I said was if GT, and specifically Polyphony, because, screw GTPlanet, who cares about them? If Polyphony isn't going to cater to the 99% of us, and they just constantly shove the 1% in our face all the time, which they still do, even with the My GT Moment series, it's only just the fastest of the fast, who cares? If they're going to do that, then fine. I will cater to the rest of people. So you could say, well, who really cares then? If they're catering to the 1% and you're catering to the 99%, surely it's not really an overlap. To some degree, that's correct. But unless you've actually been in the position that I'm currently in, I don't think you fully feel what it's like to have a really big idea that you debut, something that's significant not just for me, but for the community. In fact, more significant for the community than it is for me, with that Spotlight series, to then have this faceless company essentially rip off that idea doesn't feel great. And regardless of whether or not you can prove it or say that that is definitely plagiarism, it just puts you in a bad mood. And unless you've done something like that, you can't fully appreciate what kind of feeling that gives you. It's not a feeling of like sadness or I'm being ripped off or screwed over. It's pathetic. Because even if it's not deliberate, it's so damn close that it may as well be plagiarism. You bring out the Tesla Model S and some other company brings out the Tesla Model D instead. Oh, that's definitely not plagiarism. It's not the same thing. It has a different name. It came out at a different time. Yeah, sure it did. I'm sure if that was your company, you'd feel exactly that way. And at the end of the day, screw GTPlanet, screw the moderators, they're absolutely hopeless. And unfortunately, it's the moderators that give the whole site a bad name, because there are a number of members on GTPlanet who I actually get along with really well. A number of you guys here on the channel, even Patreon backers here, who I've got on well with for literally years and have no issues with and never have. So it's not GTPlanet members that I have an issue with. It's just that select few, absolute Neanderthal level so-called writers that consider themselves to be moderators, that unfortunately set the example for the rest of them. And the rest of them are just enough of a mindless lemming to follow that exact lead. Because at the end of the day, if your moderators are acting like imbeciles, which they do, they just veil it behind nice words and correct PC ways of saying things, if that's the example that the people who are just the average Joe on there are being given, well, then why would they aspire to be any better than that? If that's the example they're being given, of course that's the way they're going to act. And a lot of them, let's be honest, they're just dumb enough to think that that's probably a good idea. So ultimately, I'm not going to miss GTPlanet, that's for sure. A number of the news stories that we break here on the channel actually happened before their precious crack team of writers get it done anyway. Recently, the 1.42 news dropped here way before it did on GTPlanet. The news about the Lotus hypercar, way before GTPlanet. Even the release time of that Time Attack Civic at the end of this year, according to its owner, GTPlanet didn't even comment on that, let alone confirm it. So, across the board, you keep your 400,000 people, you keep your crack team of writers, you keep whatever it is that you're trying to maintain, because you certainly don't have any image to maintain in my eyes, and as far as I'm concerned, you can keep all of that. Because at the end of the day, my genuine thoughts about GTPlanet is I wish that things were different. I wish that they weren't such a bunch of absolute imbeciles, because communities are always stronger when they are together. I wish that the HSG community and the GTP community could actually have synergy. But unfortunately, they're morons. So that is not going to happen. I'm glad I'm not a part of that website anymore. I can still see all of their news stories. I just can't talk on the forums. Oh, how will I sleep tonight? So, good riddance to you. You're a bunch of idiots. That's all you're ever going to be. And to the rest of you, I'm not using this as like a call to arms to go over there and have a rant on my behalf. Don't even bother. They're literally not worth the effort. They're not worth the time. And that's why they're just on the end of this video tacked on instead of the topic, because that is about what they deserve, to be an afterthought. So, overall, that's it for this installment. The main point, though, is episode 100. So thank you to you guys for getting us to this point. Here's looking forward to the future with various other big things that I can guarantee are still coming. It's not just real-world car reviews and the community spotlight and various other things that doubtless various other people will copy again in the future. We have very many big things that are going to happen on this channel, and once again, unfortunately, a lot of them I can't really say yet because I can't do them. Either I can't afford to do it, or the circumstances don't make it viable, and for some things, the channel itself just isn't really big enough to justify it yet, because there are certain things that if I produce them, I want them to be seen by more people. So in order to do that, I want to wait a bit longer. But ultimately, that is it for episode 100. Thank you guys once again for sticking around on the channel, for enjoying the content, and for making Beards and Cars what it is now. And of course, once again, jump over to the SoundCloud link below and check out the audio version if that is what you're into, and check out some of the earlier episodes in this series. You might find some episodes that you'll be surprised that we did so early on by clicking the link to the playlist below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.